So, over the past year, I have really been enjoying weighted pull ups and I've been seeing steady gains with the movement. I thought it might help some people out if I made a video sharing my strategy for attacking this lift. Here are my best sets to date. I've done 2 plates for 5, 1 plate for 11, and 72 and a half pounds for 8. These are all at a body weight between 185 and 190. And the 1 and 2 plate sets were just AMRAP sets done at the end of a block to test my strength. I don't usually work in those rep ranges. And my goal is to hit 2 plates or 90 pounds for 10 reps over the next year or two. So, first, I want to provide some background to give all this some context. I mainly train for hypertrophy. I'm not an optimal bro, but training variables like loading and proximity to failure are going to align with this. I started adding weight to pull ups in June of 2024, so about a year before putting this video out. And I could have done this earlier, but this is just when I decided to get a weight belt and get into the weighted calisthenics. I've been lifting in some capacity for over 10 years, so I already had experience with plenty of pulling movements like rows, pull downs, all that. And I've always been able to do body weight pull ups. I could do them as a kid, I could do them in high school before lifting weights consistently. And I say all that just to establish that my starting point might be different than yours. And also, since adding weight, I have only been doing neutral grip pull ups. I had a non lifting related injury earlier last year, and it just feels better this way. It doesn't aggravate it. And besides that, I do think that neutral grip feels better for a lot of people, and I like them. Also, I've lost some weight since I started with the weighted pull ups, which helps to an extent. I was around 195 to 200 pounds then, and I'm now between 185 and 190. So let's get into some details. I've only been working in the 6 to 8 rep range. That's about as low as I'll go for any exercise, but I find this to be the perfect loading range for this movement. It's low enough to drive solid strength gains and keep endurance from being the limiting factor in my sets, but high enough to provide a good hypertrophy stimulus without too much strain on the joints. In my general training, I do alter rep ranges, but I felt no need to with this lift. If you are focusing on pure strength or the pursuit of 1 rep max pull-up PRs, you might want to incorporate heavier loads. Now I'll go into proximity to failure, volume, and frequency. These are interrelated, and by that I mean how I approach one of these variables will impact how I approach the others. So when I do pull-ups, my sets are going to be anywhere between 0 and 2 reps in reserve, usually around 1 RIR on average. And I will say in the beginning, my average RIR may have been slightly higher than this. Sometimes when I introduce a new compound movement, I sort of ease into it. I take time to get my technique down while gradually increasing the load and not pushing to my limits each set. I feel like this sets me up for success in the long term, and I did the same thing with weighted dips. And I'd say the more technical the lift, the more this approach makes sense. As for volume, I usually do 3 sets in a given session. I feel like 2 to 3 sets is perfect given my proximity to failure. You can get away with more sets though if you are leaving more reps in the tank. For frequency, I do weighted pull-up variations twice per week, and I alternate these close and wide neutral grip pull-ups. Now, these are pretty close variations. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this, but as I said earlier, pronated and supinated variations bother an injury I have, so this is what I do. If you're doing body weight movements twice per week and training close to failure, I would recommend using another variation or grip on the second day. And for a typical hypertrophy program, you could do pull-ups one day and some sort of pull down or machine on the second. Now, higher frequencies, say 3 times per week for a given compound movement, are probably not something you're going to see in a hypertrophy-focused program, but in general training, they can be used if you adjust other variables accordingly. If you're just trying to improve your pull-ups, you might benefit from this kind of higher frequency and pulling back on the proximity to failure. So now let's talk about progression. I use dynamic double progression, so I pick a rep range, in my case 6 to 8 reps. Once I reach the end of that rep range, in this case 8 reps, I increase the weight by 2.5 pounds in the next session on that set only. And the 2.5 pounds I really just use on calisthenics. Usually it's 5 pounds or whatever one level is on a machine. So if these are my results from the prior session, let's say I got 70 for 7, 57.5 for 8, and 52.5 for 7. In the next session, I would increase the weight to 60 pounds on set 2 because I hit 8 reps, and I would use the same weights on sets 1 and 3 because I'm still under 8 reps. And I'll recommend standardizing your form for progression purposes. I want to have control on the eccentric. I go all the way down, and on the concentric, I pick something my eyes have to meet at the top for the rep to count. In this case, there's a machine towards the back of the room I use as a point of reference. You don't want progression to just be a function of your form getting sloppier and sloppier. I certainly have been guilty of this at times. But on the other hand, in the context of getting jacked, you don't get bonus points for perfect form when you're not pushing hard and progressing the lift over time. So over the past year, I've either done a lower back and chest, arms and delts split, or a lower upper split. I'm focused on progressing pull-ups, and I want to use max weights for my sets, so these are always at least the first pulling movement of the session. I like pressing after pulling, so they're always my first movement, period. This might depend on what kind of split you run, but I would just say if you're focused on progressing weighted pull-ups, I would make sure you don't do any exercises beforehand that will detract from your pull-up strength. So now let's talk about warming up. For upper body work, although I'm sure I would benefit from it, I really don't do any kind of general warm-up other than just swinging my arms around. And then this is an example of what my warm-ups might look like if I'm working up to 70 pounds. So I start with my body weight. I'll usually do 3 to 5 reps or so. I might do another warm-up set with my body weight if I feel like I need it. And then I make 15-pound jumps up to 60 pounds. I hit that for a rep or two. And then I jump 10 pounds to my working weight of 70. And if I feel like I need smaller jumps at the end, I might go from 45 to 55 to 65, hit that for a rep, and then go to 70 pounds. And I don't necessarily recommend this. It's just what has worked for me. The goal is just to prepare myself for my working sets without detracting from my strength. And to close this out, I will touch on fatigue management. So this extends to my training in general. I have blocks of training that usually end up lasting between 8 and 12 weeks. And I utilize deloads when I need them to drop fatigue at the end of those blocks. And I'll make an entire video on deloads at some point, but basically they entail easier training sessions and or extra rest days to set up another block of productive training. So how can we make training easier? Well, you could lower the volume, frequency, or loading. You could also train further away from failure or some combination of these. I really do think this is an art. And among people who utilize deloads, you'll see a lot of different approaches. What I do at the moment is I cut back my volume by around 50 to 70%, and I usually throw in extra rest days as well. Sometimes I cut back on proximity to failure. Just kind of depends on my schedule and what's going on in that block. In any case, after the deload and at the start of a new block, I will come back using lighter weights compared to the end of my last block, and I'm usually training slightly further away from failure with less volume in the first week. So I just finished a block at 70 pounds for 8, which was a PR on weighted pull-ups. In the next block, I will start at a lighter weight, and over the course of sometime, likely between 8 and 12 weeks, I'll look to beat that PR. And this is how I plan to keep attacking this movement. So hopefully this helped. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below or email me at zdspyt@gmail.com. Check out my free training resources playlist below. I have files you can use to plan out and track your training, keep a record of your PRs, and manage bulks and cuts. I also have a longer video in there that includes a couple free programs inspired by my Most Jacked Fullback series, Most Jacked Linebackers. First episode is coming out very soon. Those programs come with tracking files and guidance on things like substitutions, intensity, volume, and progression. That is all. Have a good day.